Greatly appreciate the opportunity to be here with y'all today. Everybody hear me okay? All right, perfect. I probably don't need this, but I'm gonna use it just so I don't get in any trouble otherwise. Piggybacking a little bit off of some of those questions, you know, that VAC 45 deal or some similar program to it, I think that's one of the best things that we can be doing from an industry standpoint is setting those cattle up to be successful later on. The thing as a nutritionist that I would encourage those of you that are using that kind of program to do is, why don't we make it a VAC 60 or a VAC 60 plus? Now, we got to keep an eye on when some of those vaccinations have to be administered, at least a duration from then until the time those cattle are marketed to still work in the program. But what we know is gain on those weaned calves is backloaded. So at 30 days to 40 days, we're really getting a lot of those cattle back to where they started when we weaned them. And that gain is exponential for the next month or so. So we can add a lot. We can use that as an opportunity to actually feed some additional value into those cattle if we add a couple days on. But that's not what I'm here to talk to you all about. Andy had asked me to come and talk about a number of different topics once I can get this thing going again. Let's try that. Nope, it's not on the switch. Yeah, that'd be great. All right. So, you know, what I'm here to talk to you about are ways that we can go about meeting nutrient requirements of cattle. We can go on and move to the next one, if it'll let you. All right. Okay. So first thing, and this is a topic that's already really been touched on a number of times this morning that I'm going to go ahead and touch again because I do think it is very, very important, is really where do we start? How do we want to think about going about trying to make sure we're meeting requirements of cattle, but doing it in the most economical way possible? Okay. And that does require rethinking the way that a lot of us have done some things for quite a bit of time. I'm also going to provide you with a little bit of an overview of nutrient requirements, focus on the cow side, but those of you that may be backgrounders or stocker operators as well, I'm going to include some information for growing cattle, and then really thinking about how we go about doing that, some of the methods, tie in as much economics as I can. I'm not an economist. Justin's going to speak later this afternoon, so I definitely encourage you to fall back on him for economic advice. We go to the next slide. Maybe. All right. So you can go ahead and click it one more time. So if we think about meeting the nutrient requirements of that female, you can go back just one. Is it?
You said touch the pad and go forward.
Okay. I'll tell you All right, there we go. So if we think about that gal standing in the middle, and most of us in this type of environment, we're using forages to meet the majority of their nutrient requirements, right? Now that may change once we get into a dry lot or a feed yard or grow yard kind of setting. But then everything else that we do from a supplementation standpoint, in my mind, needs to be complementary. If we don't need it, don't feed it, because that's an additional cost and maybe not necessarily an investment. But if we have a good, solid understanding of that base of that animal's diet, then we can make strategic decisions in terms of figuring out what else do we actually need to be feeding to that animal. That holds true for protein and energy supplementation. It holds true for mineral and vitamins. Okay? All right, we can go to the next one. All right. The other thing we have to understand, and I think that is the base way. So you have an offer on the table for free forage analysis. Take that up. Use that. I think that's an awesome, awesome opportunity. But as I start talking about nutrient requirements and then trying to tie in how we actually go about feeding cattle to meet those needs, we do have to understand this concept of nutrient partitioning. And really, partitioning is just a fancy word for prioritization. Okay, there is a hierarchy in which cattle use nutrients. Okay, that animal, from an evolutionary and an adaptation standpoint, it is selfish. Okay, so it has to meet its own requirements to survive before it's really sending nutrients anywhere else. The exception to that is lactation. And this is a very simplified overview of this hierarchy. This thing, if I put every different need in there, it's going to be a couple pages long. Okay? But first and foremost is maintenance and lactation. Got to meet those needs, at least to a great extent, before that animal starts thinking about doing any of these other things. So next on the list comes growth. If we're talking about cows and she's already pregnant, then it's that existing pregnancy. So you heard a little bit about fetal programming. I'll touch on that again just briefly. But that's what we're really talking about with meeting the needs of that existing pregnancy. Or if she's not pregnant yet, the ester cycle and actually going on and becoming pregnant again. Okay? When we're not meeting nutrient requirements, that animal takes an axe to this list. It starts at the bottom and it works its way up. Okay, so when we start shorting that animal in terms of its need, it starts sacrificing some of these things. Okay. Other thing about energy and protein, I want to kind of set a foundation for. These are the descriptors that I'm going to use. Okay, so energy. We've heard a lot of talk in the past about TDN. I don't know what form of energy that Ted had spoke about here in the Panhandle before, but we have a much better method of quantifying energy as it relates to meeting the requirements of cattle. It's a net energy system. It's been around longer than I've been alive. Okay? But we're really just starting to see adaptation of this system into the pasture range or forage based sector. Feed yards have been using it for a very long time. But the idea is that animals partitioning those nutrients. So we have to meet its energy requirements for maintenance. Once that's met, any additional feed energy that is remaining can be used by that animal for growth. Okay? Then once we meet energy requirements, that animal has to consume enough protein or source of nitrogen so that its system can produce enough protein to support that energy dependent level of growth and performance. So we spend a lot of time thinking about protein. Spend a lot of time talking about protein. I'm not here to say that protein is not important, because it is. But at the end of the day, in an energy deficient environment, feeding more protein, so feeding protein above that animal's requirements, will not increase performance to a substantial degree. They will burn it for energy, but they'll do it very inefficiently. It's very expensive. So if we want to change growth performance of cattle, we do it with energy, and then we make sure we're feeding enough protein or enough source of things that animal can turn into protein to support that energy dependent level of performance. Okay? So it looks like a fairly complicated graph, and what this is it's showing the energy requirements of the cow throughout her productive year. Okay, so I want to just take a minute to set this up for you. Okay, I've got month down here as months since calving. I don't like to put it up there as a month because it's the actual month, because as soon as I do that, somebody's going to say, well, I'm not calving in May, I'm calving in January. Okay, so this is months since calving. We go throughout the productive year. I've got it expressed in megacalories. So think of a megacalorie as 1,000 of our normal calories that you would see on the back of a snack or a nutrition table. Okay. What I've done is I've taken each of those needs, and this is calculated for a 5-year-old, what I'm going to call a mature cow, so she's done growing at that point in time. I'm going to say she weighs on average about 1,300 pounds. Okay, that gets pretty close to a lot of our cattle, obviously not all of them. Okay, taking each of those needs, so what she needs to maintain herself, what she needs to lactate. The one we often forget about is what she needs to support that pregnancy, so the little guy that hopefully is cooking in the oven for at least some time of every year, and then I've added them all up and then totaled that as the line you see up top. The point to take away from this is there's a huge amount of variation in the amount of energy that female requires throughout the year. Okay, it's almost cut in half at a certain time in that year. Okay, so what's happening out here 6 to 7 months post-calving that's causing her energy requirements to drop so far? What hopefully have we done? We've weaned a calf. That lactation requirement has gone away, right? Yes, she will naturally do this on her own, but if we let her do it on her own, this line is going to drag out to about here somewhere. Okay? Then she's not going to have time to reset that mammary gland, which dairy industry figured this out a long time ago. It has to happen. She's got to have at least 60 days or more, ideally, to reset that udder. Okay? The one I mentioned that we forget about is pregnancy. Okay? We always talk about, and it's true, that requirements for milk are huge. Okay? See it, they peak right here. Okay? So somewhere just shy of 2 months after she calves, she's going to be at her milk production. That's about a third of all of her energy requirements. But look out here right before she calves. Look at how much that fetus, that calf that's still developing, that she's getting ready to hopefully spit out on the ground without any problems, and it's going to survive that whole process. Okay? Its requirements are almost as high as her peak milk requirements were. It's an area we often do not give enough credit. Okay? And so if we're trying to nutrient restrict pregnant cows because we don't want that calf to get too big, we need to completely rethink that. Because to a meaningful degree, we cannot use nutrition to change birth weight to the extent that it affects calving difficulty. Okay? This does not work that way. All right, I want to shift over and talk about protein a little bit. Notice how, again, I'm expressing these as an amount. Okay? That's the reality. If we think about macronutrients, protein, and energy, cattle require an amount of them. They do not require a percentage of them. So the example I'll use is, let's just say we feed that 1,300-pound cow dairy quality or even feed yard quality alfalfa hay, so pretty good quality stuff. Generally meet the requirements, right? What if we only feed her 2 pounds a day of it? It's not going to meet her requirements. They require a certain amount of those nutrients. So at that peak point, because of that drive from lactation, that cow's going to require somewhere in the vicinity, depending upon her size, 3 to 3.5 pounds of protein per cow per day. Okay? And I'm making some assumptions here. We're assuming there's enough energy that cow can actually produce the amount of protein she needs as a combination of what she makes in the room and as well as what has been able to bypass that system. So the example that I'll use is, where I come from, in the mid-Atlantic region, back further towards the southeast, closer to the coast, protein tubs are huge. Okay? All right? This is not to advocate for or against protein tubs as a source of nutrient. But if we think about taking that, I'll take the conventional economy line cooked protein tub that's 25% protein. Okay? She's going to consume about 1/2 pound of that tub per head per day. How much protein is she actually getting? She's getting 1/8 of 1 pound of protein out of that tub. So we're going from here to here on this graph. You see where I'm getting at with that? So when we think about actually feeding nutrients and picking supplemental feedstuffs, there's a lot of things that we have to consider. We've got to consider what's in them, but we got to consider what they're going to get out of them and how much they're consuming is going to drive that. Okay? Reality is that we are not always able to, and it is almost always not economical to meet 100% of this animal's requirements. That's where body condition comes in. Body condition is our insurance that she's got enough stored away so that when times are a little tougher, hopefully they're not that tough, but when they're a little bit tougher, she's got reserves that she can pull from to keep meeting her needs, keep meeting the needs of that little one that's still growing inside her. Okay, so it fills that void. And that's really going to be one of the main things that signals her brain after she calves that it is time to start cycling again. Okay, there's a whole cascade of hormonal events that drive that process. Body condition is a major player in that. Okay, so if you think about where we want to see these things in terms of defining that ideal point. So what I've done is I've shown body condition scores from 3 to 7, and then the amount of time that it takes after calving, on average, for that cow to return to estrus. Okay? So if we want this female to calve once a year for us, so roughly 365 days, how long does she have after she calves until we need her to get bred again? The clock starts ticking as soon as she calves. How long does it tick for until we're outside of that year window? Yeah. Mid-80s. Okay, dependent upon gestation length, factors that drive that. But yeah, I generally say 83 to 85 days is about where we're at. Okay, so if you think about these cows that calved at a body condition score of 3, They didn't even start cycling till outside of that window again, okay? The other thing we need to consider is that generally speaking, that first return to estrus is not going to be fertile. It's only going to be fertile for very few females. Ideally, they're going to get pregnant on the second or third actual heat cycle that they have once they start cycling again. So these fours, 70 days, if she most likely does not hit that first time, we add 21 days of that, we're at 91 days, she's too far out already. Okay? That's one of the reasons why we say this 5 is kind of our golden standard. Because at 59 days, if she doesn't hit then, she comes back in at 80. So if everything went right, we're good. And 6, yeah, it's going to be a little better. We start to push the envelope on some economics. And 7s, yeah, if we want to make some progress in moving them up in calving season, we can feed it into them. We just got to make sure that we're doing it in an economical way. And a lot of times, that's not going to be the case. Okay? And these numbers just show the overall pregnancy rates throughout a normal breeding season, couple-month breeding season that correspond to that. Okay, so it falls right in par. These 2s through 4s, for the most part, those are not going to be very satisfactory overall pregnancy rates. We get to the 5s and 6s, now we're cooking with gas. This is something that we can work with. It doesn't mean that those 4s won't work. Okay. All right. So I'm going to say that ideal body condition score is going to be about a 5. Okay. Reality is that's not always going to be the case, and it's darn sure not going to be the case for every female in the herd unless we're overfeeding them or their genetics are not matched to our environment. Okay? So when that isn't an option, we need to think about managing cattle on an increasing plane of nutrition. Okay? So that's where supplemental feedstuffs, energy, and protein are going to come in to help essentially make her brain think she's in a better state than she is. And that is quite effective at starting to drive estrus cyclicity and getting these things bred back again. The caveat is we can't just trick them really quick and then stop feeding, okay? Because that pregnancy will not last very long if we do that, okay? So we need to make them, if we're going to use this, we need to make them think times are getting better, but then times do need to get better. Otherwise, it's not going to work very well. The other thing that I would mention is identifying the ones that don't work. Okay, so if we're really struggling to get them to calve at a 5, okay, let's calve them at a 4.5. But we need to be very pointed, very purposeful at identifying those cows that do not work and will not get pregnant at that body condition and find them another career in the industry. Okay, that's how we make genetic progress in reproduction. Okay. Yes, it's a lowly heritable trait, but within our own, within our own environments, it is pretty highly heritable. Okay, so that's just something we need to consider is making sure that those animals are going to work in our environment. The other thing that often comes to mind is those 3-year-olds, those first calf heifers. When it comes to preg check time, we're identifying the ones that didn't calve that year, kick them out. I'd say for the majority of us, those are going to make up the bulk of those that just did not work. Okay? The reason they're so dang hard to get bred back is because they're different. Okay? They are different than mature cows. Notice how, for those examples, I use that 5-year-old mature cow. Okay? This heifer is not mature until essentially she weans her second calf. Okay? She is still growing. And think back to that hierarchy of nutrients. Growth is more important to that animal's survival than making a new one. Okay? So if we're managing them the same way we're managing the cows, and we're managing the cows that way because we know that's what works in that environment for those cows, we're shorting those first calf heifers. Okay? So when it comes down to it on an equal body weight basis, we generally assume that those first half heifers have 10 to 15% higher protein and energy requirements. So that means we either need to provide them with 10 to 15% more of what everyone else has access to, assuming that they can physically consume that much, or it needs to be 10 to 15% higher in terms of nutrient quality. All right, how many stockers or backgrounders in the audience? All right, awesome. Okay, So what I've done is I've taken a lot of those same things and put them up here, and I can provide you with some of this information later on if you're interested. And you'll hear a lot more about this area coming from me in the future as I kind of get set here in the Panhandle. A couple things we need to keep in mind about nutrient requirements. I mentioned they got to consume enough energy just to keep doing everything that I'm doing and y'all are doing right now. Move around, breathe, heartbeat, all that kind of stuff, right? Then any energy we feed them or they consume above and beyond that, that dictates, for the most part, their rate of gain. Okay? Then we got to provide them with enough protein to meet those requirements. A couple things that I want to point out. If you look at these numbers, notice within a weight class, so 400 pounds, 600 pounds, and 800 pounds. Okay? Within each of those classes, their maintenance requirements are the same, right? They weigh the same. They've got the same requirements. Those requirements are a function of body weight. But notice that as that animal gets bigger, that requirement goes up. So as that animal gets larger, it takes more energy just so that it can stand there and continue to be a calf. Okay? Same thing with net energy for gain. Okay? So I've gone from 1 pound to 2 pound to 3 pound per day average daily gain within each of those weight classes. Notice how, one, it takes more energy to drive that level of performance. But the other thing I want to point out is as that animal gets larger, at the same rate of gain, those requirements go up. The older that animal is, the less efficient it is at gaining. Okay? So it's one of the reasons why if we feed the same thing throughout the entire 400 to 600 or 500 to 800 pound range or whatever, one of the reasons why their growth performance changes over that time. Okay? All right. You heard a little bit this morning about fetal programming. Okay? This is something real. Okay? As you heard, we're just starting to understand this as it applies to cattle. We know far more about how it applies to humans from observations beginning back really in the 40s during World War II. Okay? But on the cow side, we need to understand that if we, I don't want to use the word starve, but if we restrict, we do not meet the nutrient requirements, protein and or energy of that pregnant female, primarily during early trimester and last trimester, okay? If we do not meet those needs, we affect not only that cow, because remember we said if she's calving in a poor state, she's not going to be nearly as likely to get pregnant again, but we affect that calf. We affect it right out the gate through affecting that cow's colostrum, not only quantity, but quality. Okay? Anybody ever had one get sick before? Dr. Behringer just talked about that, right? It happens, right? Okay? Let's just say one got respiratory disease, a young calf, you identified it, you treated it, you got him cleared up. Is it ever the same again? No, it will never perform at the level of its contemporaries that did not get sick. Some of this starts before that thing was even born. Okay? Thermoregulation. If you're calving in a cold environment, where I came from, it was normally a cold and wet environment. Okay? These calves that have been nutrient restricted while they're cooking in the oven do not thermoregulate correctly. Those are those cold ones that wind up having to come inside, or they wind up not making it because they can't keep themselves warm. And then on the feed yard side or later in that animal's life, we affect how it grows. We affect what its carcass not only looks like, how big it is, how much value it was retained and captured in that animal. Okay? One of the things I do want to take a little more time to talk about is from the cow-calf side, if we think about retaining females. Okay? And I'm trying to show the least amount of data possible because I know data is not all that exciting to look at. But if we think about retaining females out of cows that were nutrient deprived, okay, so this cow was restricted while she's pregnant, we affect that replacement female and her productivity in the herd. We affect growth performance, so yeah, we're going to affect weaning weight. We generally don't change birth weight to a substantial or meaningful degree, okay? But if we think about taking those calves and then using them as replacement females, we see huge differences in fertility. Primarily, how soon those things start cycling. In this experiment, they quantified that as the percentage that calved in the first 21 days. That is one of our best indicators of how profitable that female is going to be, because it's one of our best indicators of how long she stays in the herd. Okay? We affect a lot of those things before that calf was even born. There we go. All right, so you've heard it. I'm going to say it one more time. If we think about meeting requirements in a range or forage-based setting, you need to focus on the forages. It's awesome if you can take the opportunity that's presented to you and get an understanding of what is in what you're feeding. That holds true for pasture or range. That holds true for hay. I generally don't like buying roughages if I don't already know what was in them before I pull the trigger. Okay? And then using complementary feedstuffs that are going to fill the void that remains. Okay? A couple things. We got to feed enough of it to fill the void. Okay? If we don't, we may help, but we're probably not going to get to where we need to be. Okay? And then the other thing that I think this is something that you all can probably all appreciate, is that we just got to think about feeding it in a way that's going to keep it from blowing away in the wind. Okay? Because that's a really, really expensive way of putting fertilizer out on the ground. Okay? So as I see it, I think there are 5, and we could argue about this list all day long. I think these are the 5 major factors that we need to consider. First and foremost, what's even available to you? We can talk about all kind of different stuff all day long, but if you can't get it, it doesn't matter, right? So start with what's available to you, and then does it actually provide what you, or more importantly, what your cattle need? Okay? So is it available to you? Is it going to meet their needs? And then we need to start thinking about, okay, are there any additional savings or expenses associated with time, labor, storage, waste? Okay? Shrink is a real thing. Okay? It is a very expensive thing. The other thing I'd add is, do any of the options act as a vehicle of delivery for something that is valuable to you? So example I'll use is an ionophore. Okay? Does anything act, or some of these other products that you've heard about or may continue to hear about? Okay? And then last, although I think this is probably one of the ones that really cuts in and can make it or break it in terms of your overall feed cost, is of those options that remain, which one is the most economical means of filling that nutrient void? Okay? You've got to keep in mind, not all feeds are created equally, and a lot of that information, unfortunately, because of some regulations and some regulations that maybe aren't there, a feed tag does not always paint the entire picture of that product. Okay? But we can learn a lot by a Google search, by making some phone calls, by having quick conversations with the right people. But retail price often will not reflect the differences in those options. Okay? So I would encourage you to consider making supplemental feedstuff decisions based on needs and value. Okay? I think value rather than cost is an important thing to consider. Because just like anything else, the cheapest option is very rarely the most economical option. I make $0 selling feed, guys. Okay? All right? And I employ some of these practices to my own cattle. But one of the things that we can do is we can evaluate nutrient costs. So dollars per unit of protein, dollars per unit of energy, to take those feeds and put them on a level playing field. So we're no longer comparing apples to oranges. Now it's more of an apples to apples comparison. Pretty quick and easy way to calculate that. One of the things that we had done when I was at University of Tennessee, and this calculator is available. Justin and I have talked a little bit about this actually when I came in and interviewed, is expanding some of these kind of decision-making tools. We have every intention, or at least I have every intention, of us continuing to do that. He's shaking his head in the back, so we're all good. But this one is still available at utbeef.com. Go to the nutrition tag, and it's a free Excel sheet download. What it does is you enter the information, and it will automatically make those calculations for you, and then it will calculate a relative value ratio for those supplemental feeds. Okay? Same thing applies to forages or roughages. It can be used the exact same way. Okay? So one of the last 2 points that I want to make, one of these is I just want to illustrate that retail price comparison. Okay? So this is real information. These were some numbers that I got about 15 minutes calling around on Friday afternoon. Okay, 2 options for range cubes. Okay, These two options both are 20% crude protein range foods. We generally think about quality, we think protein, right? Okay. All right, unit of purchase is a ton of each of those, so the difference is $3.58 versus $4.18. So based on that information, which one are we probably going to buy? We're going to buy the cheaper one, right? Majority of us will go ahead and buy the cheaper one. All right, I'm good. All right. But the caveat, once I dug a little deeper and looked at these two products, go back one more. The difference, once I did a little more digging, was energy content. These two products were quite different in terms of their energy. If I remember correctly off the top of my head, this option A, the cheaper option, was 0.61 megacals of NEM per pound, and then we're good, we can stay. And this option B was 0.78 megacals of net energy for maintenance per pound, okay? So I'm gonna set up the scenario. The scenario is that we've done a good job of getting a better understanding of our forage base or whatever, maybe a harvested roughage we're gonna feed. We figured out, working with our nutritionist, pretty low quality. We need to feed an additional pound of supplemental crude protein per cow per day, and we need to feed 4 megacals of net energy of maintenance to meet their need. Feeding it, I put this on a 100 cow basis, and we're going to feed for 90 days, so 3 months, okay? All right. So in order to meet their protein requirements, okay, 5 pounds of each, right, because of the same level. But we said I also need to meet their energy requirements, or that deficit that I'm comfortable with, okay? So for this option A, it's going to take 6.6 pounds of that same cube to provide the same amount, that 4 megacals of NEM, as would be provided by 5.1 pounds of that option B. Okay, so I calculate that out and look at those costs. I haven't factored in storage, labor, any of that, because this is a relative comparison. These things are going to be the same for the most part for these two. I'm at a little over $10,500 for option A, and I'm at $9,600 for option B. Okay, so on that 100 cows, just that quick digging and having a conversation with the nutritionist, okay, saved a little over $1,000 on those 100 cows. Okay, think, okay, 100 cows, $1,000. Okay, it's not huge. But what does that equate to in terms of profitability in those cattle? Probably 10% of our margin right there on what I call an average year. Okay, so it's taking these kinds of things, these kind of decisions, and patching them together that really start to help us be as profitable as possible with the cattle. Okay, where are we at on time? All right for right now. Not wanting to listen. Okay, and this same concept, it applies. These two examples of cubes. That's what I picked. Okay, this can apply to any of our supplemental feedstuff options. Okay, mineral supplementation, I'm not going to spend too terribly much time. You know, any of these topics I've talked about today, we could have had an hour-long presentation on each and every one of them. Okay, but I am a true believer that mineral supplementation is crucial. I have seen it firsthand. Okay, I have seen it firsthand. Okay, a couple things is that generally speaking, in almost all scenarios that I've seen, forages and trace mineralized salt do not meet mineral requirements of cattle. Okay, so find that one that complements your forage base. The other thing that I think is just as important as anything with mineral supplement is consumption. It has to be one they're going to be eating, that they're willing to eat, or it's one that's being force-fed to cattle through another supplemental feed stuff. Okay, there really is no silver bullet. And the other thing that I would say is that you cannot effectively manage mineral nutrition through a needle. Okay? Injectables are not a replacement for a comprehensive mineral nutrition program. Okay? All right? You've already heard a lot of this stuff this morning. You know, a lot of different forms. Find the one that matches your management style and that your cattle will consume. I think that's the most important thing. Don't mix it with salt to reduce consumption if you think they're overeating it. unless your nutritionist specifically told you to, or that product tells you to do that on the label. There are a handful of products that have recommendations because they won't meet salt requirements on their own. Okay, but above and beyond that, if they're eating too much, move the mineral feeder. Move it further away from where they're spending time. If they're not eating enough, move it closer. Okay? 9 times or more out of 10, we can get mineral consumption right where we need it to be through doing those things. Recognize that cattle will adjust the amount of mineral that they consume based upon their needs to a small degree. Okay? That does not mean if you provide them with a buffet of different mineral ingredients, they'll eat what they need, because they will not. Okay? But generally speaking, we see mineral consumption go up when mineral content of forages changes and when mineral requirements of cattle change. So the example I ought to use is when they start calving, they start consuming a decent amount more mineral. The other thing I'll finish with, we can go ahead, is to ask yourself, is saving a couple bucks per bag a wise choice on minerals? So what I've done is I've taken 3 options, okay, A, B, and C. So I've started at the most expensive of these 3 and ended at the least, okay? So $17 versus $20 versus $23 per bag. Same concept applies. You can insert your numbers there as you wish. We're going to say that these are fairly similar, but maybe a little bit different in terms of their guaranteed analysis on the tag. Okay, so if we think about annual cost per head, this is assuming 4 ounces, so 1/4 pound per head per day consumption. Okay, we're going to be between $31 and $42 per cow per head per day. So if we look at that $3 per bag difference, because that cow eats just shy of 2 bags of that 4 ounce per head per day consumption mineral, we saved about $5.50 on that cow per year. Okay, all right, we'll go one more. Now what I want to do is I want to take and I want to apply that to 100 head. Okay, so let's say we did that. We saved $548 on 100 head. If one of those 100 cows failed to conceive because of a mineral issue, was this an economic decision? No. No. This cost us more money than it saved us. Okay? So I think we really need to rethink, as you heard from Dr. Behringer just a little bit ago, why we're making some of these decisions that we're making. And hopefully you can use some of this information to reevaluate. Maybe it's just one thing you're doing on your ranch. Okay? All right, so to sum it all up, if I were going to give you a sticky note that you could take home and slap on the fridge, here's what it would say. If we want to change performance or productivity, okay, genetics is a component of that. Okay? But in most environments, nutrition is equally, if not a greater influence on what we see as performance in that animal. So we need to think about using nutrition to drive those changes. Do it in the most economical way possible. Just recognize that cheap does not necessarily mean economical. And again, if you're looking to cut costs, make sure the benefit outweighs the risk. Otherwise, it's probably not going to be a good decision. Okay, that's some of my contact information. I just wanted to put it up there because I don't even have any business cards yet. I've been on the job officially a week today, I think. So there's some of my information, my email. I would assume you'll be able to find that on the website pretty soon. And with that, I appreciate your all's time. I recognize I'm the only thing standing between us and lunch. Do we have time for a question or two, or do we need to hold off? Okay, any questions? The last slide, yeah. Oh, maybe. I don't know. Going forward's been okay. Backwards hasn't been so great. So email is jason.smith@ag.tamu.edu.